See, what happens is you come into the church, you are forgiven of all your reckless and miserable and dirty sins that you've committed. And you realize the amazing grace that God has given you and saved you. But then what happens as life in the church, you get comfortable and you start serving God and you're doing your thing. You got your life all cleaned up. And then you begin to look over there and you see people that aren't cleaned up. And you know what you do? You become judgmental of them. And you start to be critical of them. And you start to become bitter of them. You say, well, why is God blessing them? Why aren't those people doing what they should be doing? They should be doing what I'm doing. Let me tell you something about the evangelical church in North America. We are not known for being the most forgiving bunch. You know what we're really known for? We're known for being judgmental. We're known for pointing our fingers at other people and telling them what they're doing wrong in their life. We're known for pointing out people's sin is what we're known for. That's not the reputation we should have.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
What we're doing is we're carrying on in the series I began a few weeks ago entitled The Power of Love. I've been using music titles for each of my messages. Week 1 was, what's love got to do with it? What does love got to do with it? Everything is the answer. Week 2 was Love Me Do, Beatles tune, and that was the sex talk that your parents never had with you. And then this week, the title of my message is, How Deep Is Your Love? Okay, skill testing question, think about it, 1970s, name that artist. Jesus. The answer is not Jesus, but it sort of sounds like it. Bee Gees. Bee Gees, you were so close. That was the Bee Gees. That was the late 70s. That was the first of 6 consecutive #1 hits. You kind of remember. How Deep Is Your Love was their first big hit. Their love might have been deep, but their voices were ridiculously high, right? All sang in falsetto. Staying alive, staying alive. I don't know how they did it, or more importantly, why. Sadly, the world has lost 2 of the Gibb brothers. Maurice has passed away and Robin has passed away. We still have Barry, but we almost lost him. Did you know that? Yeah, he went into a coma, miraculously woke up on a Sunday morning. Turned out all it was Saturday night fever. Yeah, he told a reporter that he survived because he was committed to staying alive. Satan was quoted in the same article as saying if he can knock off one more Bee Gee, he's going to rename hell the Disco Inferno. I could keep going if you want, How many of you remember the 70s and the disco thing? Do you remember that? You thought you were already in hell, didn't you? Wait till you get to the real hell. No, wait a minute. You're not supposed to be going there, are you? So anyway, what we've been talking about in this series is we've been talking about, amongst other things, we've been talking about the 3 types of love that we find in Scripture. Now, in the English language, we only have one word for love, and it's the word love. But in the Greek language, which the New Testament is written, there's several words. And 3 of the words that we've been looking at are this, and I'm going to throw them up just so you can have a visual of this. And they're agape, phileo, and eros. And last week we started with eros, love, and I told you that's where we get our English word erotic, and it's all about sex. We spent the whole week talking about sex. It was very uncomfortable, especially for me, but I know it was also uncomfortable for you. And we talked about this, the fact that God invented sex. It was His idea, but it was restricted for the confines of a marital relationship between a husband and wife. However, we have taken this thing called sex, and we have corrupted it and twisted it and perverted it, and we live in this culture that is completely, totally, and utterly obsessed with sex everywhere you go. It was interesting. Kathy and I were traveling in Texas. We're right in the heart of the Bible Belt, so keep that in mind. And we're at a truck stop, and I see this T-shirt, and the T-shirt says, "My body's not a temple, it's an amusement park." Now, I tried to buy the shirt. Kathy wouldn't let me. She didn't think I had a good use for it. But nevertheless, I thought it was a great symbol of what's happened to our world, how we have misused this thing called sex. Well, this week, my message is entitled, How Deep Is Your Love? We're going to take the remaining 2 of these love. We've got eros love, and then there's phileo love and agape love left. And we're going to look at these 2 words today. Now, the first one is phileo love. I told you that means brotherly love. And it's a very important word. Don't mistake this as being some sort of low form of love. Brotherly love, this phileo love, is a very significant form of love. It's the kind of love you would have for a friend, for a coworker, for family members. Matthew chapter 10, Jesus uses it in reference to loving your father or your mother or your sons or your daughters. So it's the kind of love you would have in your family. It's a very significant, affectionate form of love. Interesting, in the noun form, which is phleos, in the noun form, it actually is literally translated friend. And so, for example, when they said he was a friend of sinners, they used that word. That he was a phleos, a friend, a loving friend to these sinners. You know, Jesus, he had a lot of acquaintances, obviously. He had 12 disciples, but he actually also had some close friends. And the Bible actually talks about these close friends from time to time. And 3 of those close friends were Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And when Lazarus was sick, before he died, they sent a message and said, the one you love is sick. And the word they used was this word phileo. And so that's what brotherly love is. And so Jesus had that kind of love for his friends. So don't diminish it. Don't think, it's just some sort of meaningless, insignificant form of love. It's a very significant, powerful, and important, affectionate form of love. But there is another form of love called agape. Most of you have heard that word. We use that word quite a bit in our culture. Here's what's fascinating about it. We call it divine love, even though that's probably not the right definition. We call it that because it appears in the Bible more than anywhere else in any literature anywhere. Although the word does appear in secular Greek literature, it's very rare, and here's why. What it means is it means selfless or sacrificial or unconditional love. And here's the problem. That just doesn't hardly exist in our world. So therefore, it doesn't exist very much in secular literature. But when we come to the Scripture, that's the word that is used of God's love for us and our love for one another. It's agape love, which is an unconditional, selfless, sacrificial type of love. Now, here's the word I'm going to give you. It may not be really familiar with you. Here's the best definition I can give you of agape love. It's unrequited love. You say, what's that mean? That means that it doesn't have to be returned. That means you love somebody whether they love you back or not. I want you to think about God's agape love for us. This is the word used. It says, He demonstrated His agape, this is Romans 5:8. He demonstrated His love for us, and yet while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. When we were sinners, when we didn't know Him, when we didn't even care about God, He still loved us, and He showed us His love, His agape love, by dying on the cross for us. Now, here's where I'm going with this, and you might be challenged by this. It's the same type of love that He tells us to have for one another. See, this is what He said. He said the great commandment is to love agape, the Lord your God, with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and all your strength, and to love your neighbor, agape, to love your neighbor unconditionally as yourself. You know what that means? You have to love your neighbor even if they don't love you back. You know what that means? That means you have to love your enemy and you know they're not going to love you back. That means you have to love your wife, men, even though she might not love you back. That's just how it works. Here's the test. You're going to love this. I'm in so much trouble for telling you this, but here's the test for unconditional love. Take your dog, take your wife, lock them both into the trunk of your car. Come back an hour later and see which one of them is happy to see you. I guarantee you it won't be your wife. You shouldn't even be laughing at that joke. Shame on you. All right, just kidding, obviously. Don't try that at home, kids. So let's look at this. Let's try to find a place in Scripture, and I'm going to show it to you, where these two words are used and really defines the difference of them. And there's no better place than in John chapter 21. Now understand, you can't see this in the English because it just uses the word love. But in the Greek language, if you went and studied it, you would see the use of phileo and agape, and the difference is quite profound. Now here's the story. Jesus has died. He's risen from the dead. He's shown Himself to His disciples. He's back on the scene. In John chapter 21, Peter turns to the other disciples and he says this. He says, I'm going fishing. Now understand, he wasn't saying I'm knocking off for the day and going for fishing and I'll be back to work tomorrow. What he meant was I'm going back to fishing. He says, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm going back to fishing. So he goes back to fishing. The other disciples come with him. Jesus has a dramatic encounter with them where he, helps them catch all these fish. And then Jesus confronts Peter, and he says this to him. He says, Peter, do you love me more than these? And we don't know if he's pointing at the fish or the disciples or who it is, but he asks this question. He says, do you love me, Peter? And the word he uses is, guess which word? Yeah, it's agape. He uses the word agape. And then Peter responds and he says, Lord, you know that I love you. But you know what word he used? He used the word phileo. He did not use the word agape. Jesus specifically asked him, he said, do you agape love me? And he specifically says, you know I'm your friend. He says, you know I love you and I have affection for you as a friend. So Jesus asks him a second time. And he says, Peter, do you love me? And uses the word agape. And a second time, Peter answers and said, you know I love you, and uses the word phileo. Again, he didn't get there. So then Jesus asks him a third time. And this is what you'll never see. Jesus asks him a third time and says, Peter, do you love me? But changes the word to phileo. And he says, Peter, do you love me as a friend? And it says, Peter was grieved that he asked him a third time. And he says, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you, phileo. So you think, well, what's going on here? There's lots of different explanations. What's going on here? Why did Jesus ask him 3 times if he loved him? Why? How many remember what happened just 3 days earlier? 3 days earlier, Peter had denied his Lord how many times? 3 times. He had denied him 3 times. And so now he's here and he's asking him this question. He says, this is what I want from you, Peter. I need to know, do you love me? Do you love me with an unconditional love? Are you willing to go to the end of the earth? Are you willing to sacrifice yourself? Are you willing to pay the ultimate price to follow me? And you know what? Peter wasn't able to get there. I don't think Peter was being obstinate. I think Peter genuinely and sincerely was saying, I don't know. I don't know if I can get there. I don't know if I can love you unconditionally. I don't know if I can bring myself, because just a few days ago, when I said that if everybody else forsook you, I would never forsake you, by the next morning, I had denied you 3 times. And I think Peter was being brutally honest. And he says, you know I love you as a friend. You know I love you. But to ask me, can I get there? To ask me, can I love you unconditionally? To ask me if I can go to the end of the earth for you? I'm not sure, given my track record, I can get there. And Jesus, it's interesting, doesn't mess with him, doesn't bawl him out, does he? Wasn't harshly. He says, Peter, do you love me as a friend? He says, you know I love you as a friend. You know what's fascinating about this whole story? Is that Peter did get there, didn't he? From that point on, for the rest of his life, he never once ever turned and shrunk back from his love for his Lord. From that point on, he put it all out there. From that point on, he lived a selfless and sacrificial life. He loved his Lord unconditionally, to the point where he died himself, crucified by the Romans. And when they were crucifying him, he said, I'm not worthy to die like my Lord. Crucify me upside down. Peter was crucified upside down. He wasn't sure he could get there, but he got there. So I think at this point, you've probably got a pretty good idea the difference between phileo love and agape love. And now what we need to do is we need to move into the application of this. And I want to tell you a story today, a story you all know, one of the parables. And the words are not mentioned there. Eros and phileo and agape are actually not mentioned in these stories. But what we're going to do is see if we can identify these words in the context of the story. And it's the story of the prodigal son. And in the story of the prodigal son, it works like this. You had this wealthy farmer. He had only 2 sons, a younger and an older, obviously. And the younger son, probably a young adult, came to him and said, Father, will you give me my inheritance early? And the father, for some inexplicable reason, gives him his inheritance. And what this young lad does is he takes his inheritance, probably a significant amount of money, and he leaves and goes off to a foreign country. And he spends the whole thing on wasteful living. The word prodigal means wasteful. And he goes and he blows the entire fortune. Then he finds himself destitute. He finds himself in the midst of a famine. And he gets a job feeding the pigs. And there he is. He's up to his waist in pig slop. And he's thinking to himself, what have I done? I have messed up so royally. Look at me. He says, I'd love to eat what the pigs eat. And he comes up with this idea that maybe what he should do is return to his father and beg his father to take him as a servant because his servants do better than he's doing. So that was his plan. We're going to pick it up. It's Luke chapter 15, and we're going to pick it up in verse 17. Verse 17, but when he came to himself, some translations appropriately say when he came to his senses, when he realized what he had done, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer to be worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. So here we have this story. He's coming back, and as he's on his way, the father sees him and runs to him and embraces him and kisses him and loves him. And most of you know the rest of the story. And what happens is he hosts a big feast for him, and he kills the fatted calf, not the skinny one. He goes right for the fatted calf, right? Significant, I think. And kills the fatted calf, but there's the older brother. What did the older brother think about this? He wasn't very happy about it. In fact, he was very unhappy. The scripture says he was angry about it because he saw what his younger brother had done. The guy had gone, blown his fortune, and the father just embraces him. And the first thing he does when this little brat comes home, the first thing he does is hosts a feast and kills the fatted calf. And so he's mad. Apparently about that fatted calf seems to be, important in this story. Now, I thought, for fun, I like to give people names. I give everybody nicknames. I don't know if you know that. And so I'm going to give these three characters in this story nicknames. And so the younger brother, instead of calling him younger brother, I'm going to call him Reckless Randy. And I'm going to call the father, I'm going to call him Forgiving Frank, because Frank's a good dad's name. Do you agree with that? And I think the older brother, I'm going to call him Bitter Bradley. And so we have Reckless Randy, and we have Forgiving Frank, and we have Bitter Bradley. We look at this picture, this birth order thing, and it's fascinating to me that as you look at this, he only has two sons, and you've got this highly responsible older son that stays home and minds the farm, and you've got the younger, entitled one who asks for his early inheritance and takes his inheritance, and off he goes. Now, this is what I want to do. This is where you participate in this. I need to know from you what types of love each one of these characters has. So we're going to talk about Reckless Randy. If you had to assign one of the Greek words for love to Reckless Randy, which one would you give him? Yeah, you said eros. Let's face it. Reckless Randy doesn't love anybody but himself. Would you not agree? He doesn't love his brother. He doesn't love his father. He only loves himself. Only cares about his own self and his own hedonism. And he takes and he goes off. And the Bible doesn't specifically say this, but I am pretty sure that if he took that money and wasted it in the short period of time, how many of you think it was probably on wine, women, and song? You have a pretty good idea that the eros love was somewhere involved in that, even though the scripture doesn't specifically say that. Let's talk about Bitter Bradley for a moment, the older son. What kind of love did Bitter Bradley have? I think he had phileo love. A few of you said that. You say, well, what do you mean he was bitter? Is that love? No, think about this for a moment. Now, he did not have unconditional love because he was mad at his brother. He at first wasn't willing to forgive his brother. So it wasn't unconditional love. But he did have love. Think about this. He would have grown up with that young lad. They probably shared a room together. They were probably best friends. They probably spent every day together, playing when they were younger, working together. He was probably constantly watching out for his younger brother. He would have had a phileo brotherly love for Reckless Randy. Do you know what I think was the worst day in Bitter Bradley's life? I think it was the day he saw his brother walking down that road with a sack full of his dad's cash. I think that was a bad day. Not only was he recognizing the selfish nature of what his brother was doing, but I think on that moment he realized he had just lost his childhood friend and his brother. I think there was a tremendous amount of pain, and it goes right back. I don't think he became unforgiving about the fatted calf. The fatted calf's a smokescreen. You know that, don't you? I think he was bitter from the moment Reckless Randy headed down that path. Now, the father, Forgiving Frank, what kind of love? Agape. Clearly agape. Did you notice that he didn't even ask his son where he had been? Did you notice he didn't ask, how much money do you have left? He didn't even ask him these questions. He just threw himself on him. He kissed him, immediately holds a feast, kills the fatted calf. Did I mention that yet? Kills the fatted calf. And then he gives him a ring, and he gives him a robe, and he gives him sandals. He rewards them. It's just crazy. Those are all symbols of his place in the family. He was not coming back as a servant. You know that for a fact. That's what the robe and the sandals and the ring was all about. He has been restored to full membership in this family. He gives his son extraordinary, unconditional love. Now, that you're probably thinking, I understand all that. That's not too complicated. Here's what you might not know. What was the whole point of this story in the first place? Why was Jesus telling this story? What was the context? Well, here's the context, people. Remember, Jesus was hanging out with sinners, and the Pharisees were accusing him, don't miss it, of being a friend of sinners. And so he's asking him, he says, why are you a friend of sinners? And so Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son. He says, this is why. And he tells the story. And don't miss the fact that as he's telling the parable of the prodigal son, everybody present, the Pharisees, the sinners, and Jesus, are all somebody. They're a character in this story. For example, who is Reckless Randy? Those are the sinners. Those are the sinners that Jesus is forgiving. He's trying to explain something to. Who is Bitter Bradley? Ouch, that was the Pharisees. And I think they knew well who they were in this picture. And then, of course, who was forgiving Frank? That was Jesus. That was Jesus. And he was explaining the dynamics of what's going on here about how this is how you act. This is what you do when people have sinned and forsaken you. You love them unconditionally. Now, just be honest with me. When you think about the story of the prodigal son, who do you identify with? Don't answer. Just think about it. You know what? 9 times out of 10, if I was to ask people that, they'll say, well, I'm Reckless Randy. That's who I am. I was the sinner. And Jesus came and he found me and he forgave me and he unconditionally loved me and he brought me into his household, into his family. He's, I'm Reckless Randy. I'm the sinner forgiven. And I think that's true. I think that's who you were. But here's what we often do, and this is going to sting. You know what we do? We move from Reckless Randy, and eventually, after a while, we become Bitter Bradley. You say, huh? What do you mean? Well, think about it. See, what happens is you come into the church, you are forgiven of all your reckless and miserable and dirty sins that you've committed. And you realize the amazing grace that God has given you and saved you. But then what happens as life in the church, you get comfortable and you start serving God and you're doing your thing. You got your life all cleaned up. And then you begin to look over there and you see people that aren't cleaned up. And you know what you do? You become judgmental of them. And you start to be critical of them. And you start to become bitter of them. You say, well, why is God blessing them? Why aren't those people doing what they should be doing? They should be doing what I'm doing. And we look at non-Christians and we look at even Christians that haven't got their act together, and be honest, we become judgmental of them. We become Bitter Bradley. Let me tell you something about the evangelical church in North America. We are not known for being the most forgiving bunch. You know what we're really known for? We're known for being judgmental. We're known for pointing our fingers at other people and telling them what they're doing wrong in their life. We're known for pointing out people's sin is what we're known for. That's not the reputation we should have, because we went from Reckless Randy to Bitter Bradley. That's not where we were supposed to go. Where were we supposed to go? We were supposed to become like Forgiving Frank. We were supposed to become like the Father. That was the plan, wasn't it? He said, here is my commandment, that you love, agape, one another, as I loved, agape, you. But a lot of times we've lost that. And our challenge today is for us to understand this unrequited, unconditional, sacrificial, and selfless love that God has commanded us to have for one another and for our world. We want to be Forgiving Frank, not Reckless Randy or Bitter Bradley. That's the point of that story. Now I want you to think about this, because I think as fathers, I think sometimes we kind of miss the mark. I think as fathers, we kind of get focused on the wrong things. You know what? We kind of think our job is the provider, right? Our job is out to, lift that bale, tote that barge. We have these, we think, wow, we're doing our part. But you see, when I read the story of the prodigal son, I have a hard time not seeing my own father in that. And you know why? My father was like this man. My father was incredibly generous, incredibly forgiving, incredibly non-judgmental. But you see, we had a tragedy in our family. My 2-year-old brother, on Father's Day, walked down to the Red River, fell in and drowned on Father's Day. My father never quite got over that. He never was quite able to deal with the grief of it, didn't know where to put that. And what he did was he sort of shut down emotionally. And he became somewhat, I would call him, emotionally detached from his children. And what he would do was, when we had stuff, he wasn't able to process it with us. He wasn't able to get into the emotion that fathers and their children need to get in. And so, but on the other hand, if we did something wrong, he'd forgive us. And if we needed money, he'd always give us money. And I discovered that that was how my father showed his love. I think the prodigal son's father showed his love by giving him money. And I don't think that's always the best thing for you to do. And so, as a young man growing up, I thought to myself, I'm not going to be like my father, as much as I loved him. I'm going to be one of those in-your-face dads. I'm going to be one of those engaged fathers. I'm going to be in the lives of my kids. They're going to hate it, but I'm going to be there. So imagine my surprise when last week, my married daughter says, you know, Pop, I got a question for you. When I played college volleyball, she played for a year, she said, how come in a whole year you only came to one single game? She said, how come? I want to know. I looked at her and I said, I don't know. Turned to Kathy, I said, where was I? And you know where I was? Probably at work. Probably doing what I do, you know, toting that, lifting that bale, toting that barge, doing what I do. And I'd realized in a lot of ways that maybe I had become a little bit more emotionally detached than I thought I was. So you know what I did? I apologized to my growing daughter. And you know what she did? She forgave me. She has to. She's a Christian, right? That's the good news. And here's my point in all of this story, is I'm just trying to get you to a place where you realize that, you know what, guys? Sometimes we're not perfect. We're not perfect dads, are we? The father, forgiving Frank, was not a perfect dad by any stretch of the imagination. But you know what? He was a loving dad. You know what? He knew something about unconditional love. He knew something about forgiveness. He knew something about it. And here I'm going to end with this. And this is, to me, the best part of the story. So the son says, I'm going home. And he starts on his way. And did you notice when we read it? He said, and while he was still a great way off, his father saw him and ran to him and kissed him. What does that tell you, that he saw him from afar off? What does that tell you? He was watching for him. He was watching for him. You know what I think? I think that father decided the day his son left how he was going to respond when that son came back. I think that father thought, I think I just blew this, as that son walked off with the drachmas. And I think he thought to himself, when he returns, I'm not going to ask him where he's been. I'm not going to ask him what he's done with the money. And when I see him, and I think every morning that father would have woke up, I think he would have looked down that windy road looking for his son. And then one morning, he looks out that window, and who does he see but his empty-handed son walking up the driveway while he was still a great way off, and he ran to greet him, and he threw himself around him, and he kissed him, and he loved him, and he killed the fatted calf. Back to that. You see, he loved him unconditionally. Here's what I'm going to say to you, fathers. You don't have to be the perfect father. You're not the perfect father. Ladies, you're not the perfect parent. You will never be the perfect parent. We will make mistakes in life. But here's the good news. Love covers a multitude of sins. Someone once said that during the apocalypse, the last man on earth will spend his last moments looking for his family, because there's nothing more important in this world. Love covers a multitude of sins, and love never fails. My question for you is, how deep is your love?
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.ghcrc.ca. churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.